My guest today is Alexa Clay. She formerly was with the Watson Institute at Brown University and is now with Ashoka, which is a network of social entrepreneurs.
Yeah, exactly. We
And
support leading social entrepreneurs around the world that really apply entrepreneurial thinking to different kinds of social and environmental problems.
and when you were at the Watson Institute, you were studying something which I found when we were talking about just utterly fascinating. It's the impact of military bases on their surrounding environment, economies, host countries, and here in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, exactly, and that's an issue that many people don't know about, but the U.S. certainly has an active military presence in a number of countries around the world. And so what I was studying was the implications for those bases on local communities and looking at the kinds of health implications, environmental problems that arose, as well as some of the cultural clashing that happened in actually having the standing military base there and the local community interests.
I mean, there certainly was that famous instance some years ago in Japan where there was a rape case, and the Japanese were, this is a long-standing thing. But to my mind, those, that sort of thing it happens, sure. But can you statistically know that that's more likely to happen around a military base than just as a one-off chance?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we showed statistically, certainly. But I think there is...
You said something about domestic violence is some...
Yeah, increasing 3 times as much,
Wow.
even in domestically in the States around military basing communities. So I think there are a number of statistics that show that, but military bases specifically, they're just such an emotional issue abroad because it's a form of territorialization. So, folks have reactions to that, and often at a national level, there's an economic incentive to host a military base, but too often local communities actually face a lot of the brunt and blowback of that economic decision.
Are there any positive sort of things that happen to having a military base in town?
I don't think so. I think you can talk about it in terms of geopolitical security for the nation. But I think when you begin to understand some of the consequences of that basing policy and some of the U.S. interests associated with it, I think it becomes very clear that they're not actually in the national interest. And even in the U.S., there are lots of, we spoke, anthropologist Catherine Lutz and I at Brown University as well, spoke to a number of military families in the States who'd witnessed, awful things happening in their communities, even exposure to military toxics. You saw people that had, cancers mixed with learning disabilities, all these strange kind of health needs that began to bundle. And there's not really an active conversation around it.
And that's interesting. And that's one of the things that you're trying to do around this, and it's one of the things that Ashoka tries to do in general, right? You said earlier, before we were talking about creating a movement around things rather than just sort of throwing money at some problem. Can you give me an example of a movement that sort of really caught on?
Sure. Social entrepreneurship is a great example of a movement that's caught on. And I think every movement really starts...
So define that a little bit for our viewers who may not may know both words, but not both words together.
Sure. It's basically someone who has a very enterprising, sort of business-oriented mentality, but works on intractable social and environmental problems. And it's really a mindset more than anything. And so when I talk about social entrepreneurship, the first thing I think of is a different kind of identity. And the key to any movement in terms of how you begin to catalyze it is to create an identity around something. And so what Ashoka has done terrifically well is actually, through this fellowship process, recognized people around the world who are working on these kinds of problems and gave them an identity. They didn't fall into this typical NGO world. They weren't sort of business entrepreneurs. And so, actually working with this network of folks around different issues, you begin to create a different way of thinking, and a different world becomes possible. And part of the Ashoka Fellow success is really around systems change. So 2/3 of Ashoka Fellows actually have some kind of policy impact at some stage in their career.
We have just a second here left, and so I just want to make this clear, because I'm a little unclear about it myself, to be honest with you. If you're the difference between being a social entrepreneur and being a philanthropist. If you're a philanthropist, you simply give your money away or give your time away. Well, if you're a social entrepreneur, you have a sustainable business model, correct?
Exactly.
So you're not always raising money, but you're somehow doing something impactful to people's lives.
Often you could have more dependent on grant funding, but you actually have a sustainable business model. And increasingly, we have this program called the Ashoka Globalizer program, which is actually taking those social entrepreneurs to the next phase, getting their innovations to scale. And so what that means, and the kind of issues you then begin to think about, is not just, is your organization secure, but are you creating a movement around what you're trying to do?